We're just days away from reaching 1,000 subscribers. If we hit this goal in the next 15 days, we'll be able to keep the channel running and continue bringing you these stories. Your subscription makes all the difference. It's quick and helps us enormously. Reunions of the Heart. Chapter 1. The New Governess. London, autumn 1852. In the thick fog that enveloped the streets of Mayfair, a young woman, in modest but clean clothes, climbed the marble steps of Thornfield House, the imposing mansion of the Duke of Ashworth. Margaret Whitmore, 26 years old, clutched her small worn suitcase, trying to calm her racing heart. For 5 years she had been seeking employment in London's great houses, always hoping. But she no longer dared formulate that hope. A governess in various families, she had learned to hide her pain behind a mask of professionalism, but each passing day made her quest more desperate. Miss Whitmore, the butler, an elderly man with silver hair, looked at her kindly. "His Grace is waiting for you in his study." Margaret followed the servant through corridors adorned with ancestral portraits and precious tapestries. When she entered the ducal study, she discovered a man in his 30s, tall and imposing, with brown hair and grey eyes that betrayed deep melancholy. Adrian Blackthorne, 7th Duke of Ashworth, stood politely. "Miss Whitmore, thank you for coming. Please sit down." "Your Grace," said Margaret, executing a perfect curtsy. Adrian observed her carefully. This woman had something different from the other governesses he had met. A deep sadness in her brown eyes, but also a quiet strength that intrigued him. "Mrs. Patterson explained the situation to you?" he asked. "Partially, Your Grace. It concerns your ward, Lady Sophia Pemberton, aged 8. "Indeed. Sophia is not my daughter, but the daughter of my late sister Catherine. Her parents died in a carriage accident 3 years ago, and since then. Well, the child has had many difficulties." Margaret nodded with understanding. "What kind of difficulties?" Adrian hesitated. How could he explain that this child broke his heart, that every time he looked at her he saw another face, other brown eyes so similar? Sophia categorically refuses any attachment. She rejects all governesses, cannot tolerate any female authority. The doctors think she's developed an aversion to maternal figures because of the trauma. "I understand," said Margaret gently. "May I meet her?" "Of course, but I must warn you. She can be very difficult, very cruel even. We've had 15 governesses in 3 years. Children who suffer sometimes need to express their pain," Margaret replied. "I don't take anything personally." Adrian was struck by the wisdom of this response. "Very well. Henderson will take you to her apartments. Sophia should be having her tea." 10 minutes later, Margaret found herself before the door of a luxuriously decorated children's salon. She knocked gently and entered. A little girl with curly chestnut hair and large hazel eyes sat at a miniature table, ostentatiously ignoring the tea and cake tray placed before her. She wore a navy blue velvet dress that enhanced her pale complexion, but her expression was that of a child much older than her 8 years. "Lady Sophia," said Margaret, approaching, "I am Miss Whitmore, your new governess." Sophia looked up and stared at her with undisguised hostility. "Another one," she said in a cold voice. "How long will you stay before leaving in tears? The last one only lasted 3 days." "I don't know," Margaret replied honestly. "That will depend on both of us, I imagine." This answer surprised Sophia, accustomed to the honeyed promises of other governesses. "You don't know me," continued Margaret, sitting on a nearby chair, but not too close so as not to startle her. "But I'd like to learn. What do you do when you're not studying?" "Nothing," Sophia replied curtly. "I don't like anything. I don't want to learn anything, and I don't want a friend. Margaret nodded. That's your right. Would you like me to sit here in silence, or would you prefer that I leave? Sophia frowned. This governess wasn't trying to correct her, lecture her, or force her to be polite. You can stay, she said finally, but don't talk to me. Very well, said Margaret, taking out a book from her pocket. They remained thus for an hour, in a silence that wasn't unpleasant. Margaret read quietly, while Sophia observed her secretly, intrigued by this woman who wasn't trying to win her over or change her. What Sophia didn't know was that looking at her, Margaret felt her heart tighten painfully. This little girl reminded her of, no, she couldn't think about that. Not now, not yet. Miss Whitmore, said Sophia suddenly, why are your eyes so sad? Margaret looked up from her book, surprised by the child's perceptiveness. Sometimes adults have sorrows too, she replied simply. Because of what? Margaret hesitated. I lost someone important long ago. Your parents? No, someone else. Sophia nodded with an understanding beyond her years. I lost someone important too, but it was my mama and papa. I know, said Margaret gently. That must hurt very much. Everyone says it will pass, but it doesn't pass. Perhaps it's not meant to pass, said Margaret. Perhaps we just learn to live with it. For the first time, Sophia seemed to really look at her new governess. There was something different about this woman, something authentic in her sadness that resonated with her own. You don't tell me I should be brave, asked Sophia. No, you have the right to hurt. You have the right to be angry. And you don't ask me to be good. You already are in your own way. Sophia suddenly stood up and approached Margaret. Can I see your book? Margaret handed her the volume. It's a collection of poems. Do you know how to read? Yes, but I only like sad stories. Happy stories are lies. Not always, said Margaret, but I understand that you prefer the truth, even when it hurts. At that moment, Adrian appeared in the doorway. He expected to find Sophia having a tantrum or Margaret in tears. Instead, he discovered his ward standing near the governess, both bent over a book. Sophia, he said softly. The little girl turned toward him, and for the first time in months, Adrian didn't see hostility in her eyes. Uncle Adrian, Miss Whitmore has books with sad poems. She says I have the right to be sad. Adrian looked at Margaret with surprise. In 1 hour, this woman had achieved what 15 others hadn't accomplished in months. That's wonderful, Sophia, he said. What none of them knew was that this first connection between Margaret and Sophia would reveal a secret the Duke had been seeking for years. A secret that would change all their lives in ways they could never have imagined. For Adrian Blackthorne had spent 5 years searching for a woman who had mysteriously disappeared from his life. A woman with brown eyes and chestnut hair. A woman who had then borne the name Margaret Pemberton, and this woman had just crossed the threshold of his house under the name Margaret Whitmore, not knowing she was exactly the one he had never stopped searching for. Chapter 2. The First Bonds. 3 weeks had passed since Margaret's arrival, and Sophia's transformation was remarkable. The little girl, once withdrawn and hostile, was beginning to open up under the patience and understanding of her governess. Miss Whitmore, said Sophia one rainy afternoon while they were settled in the library, tell me again the story of the lady who lost her daughter. Margaret looked up from the exercise book she was correcting. These past weeks, Sophia had often asked her for stories, but always sad stories that spoke of loss and separation. Which one do you prefer? The one about Demeter and Persephone? No, the real one. The one about the lady you know. Margaret felt her heart tighten. Sophia had this troubling way of perceiving what she tried to hide. I don't personally know this lady, Margaret lied gently. Yes, you do know her, insisted Sophia with childhood tenacity. That's why your eyes become all shiny when you talk about her, and that's why you understand me so well. Margaret put down her pen and looked at this perceptive child. Sophia, why does this interest you so much? Because, said Sophia, approaching her chair, sometimes I dream that my real mama isn't dead, that maybe she's somewhere and she's looking for me. Margaret's heart leaped. Sophia, darling, your parents really did die. Your uncle explained to you. I know, said Sophia quickly. I know Mama Catherine and Papa William are dead. But sometimes I think, what if I had another mama, a mama who loved me so much she would search for me everywhere? Margaret felt tears rise to her eyes. This child was expressing exactly what she herself had felt for 5 years. Sophia, sit near me, she said gently. The little girl climbed onto the chair next to Margaret, something she had never done with any other governess. If a mama had lost her little girl, said Margaret, choosing her words carefully, and if she were searching for her everywhere, what do you think she would feel? Her heart would hurt every day, Sophia replied without hesitation, and she would look at all the little girls wondering if it's hers. And if the little girl had grown up and no longer remembered her real mama, then the mama would hurt even more, said Sophia sadly, because she would recognize her daughter, but her daughter wouldn't recognize her. Margaret had to look away to hide her tears. This conversation was becoming dangerous, but she couldn't stop. Sophia, if you met this mama, what would you say to her? I would tell her she can be my mama if she wants, Sophia replied with childhood simplicity, because I really want to have a mama who truly loves me. At that moment, Adrian entered the library. He stopped short seeing the scene, Sophia sitting very close to Margaret, both leaning toward each other in an intimacy he had never seen in his ward. Forgive me, he said softly. I didn't want to disturb you. Uncle Adrian. Sophia turned toward him, face illuminated. Miss Whitmore tells me stories about lost mamas. Do you believe there are mamas who search for their little girls everywhere? Adrian looked at Margaret, struck by the strange expression he read on her face. I think it's possible, he replied slowly. And do you believe they end up finding them? I'd like to believe so, said Adrian, his eyes not leaving Margaret's. Margaret stood abruptly. I'll prepare Lady Sophia's tea, she said in a strangled voice before quickly leaving the room. Adrian and Sophia watched her leave, then Sophia turned to her uncle. Uncle Adrian, why does Miss Whitmore become sad when we talk about lost mamas? Adrian sat in the armchair Margaret had just vacated. I don't know, Sophia. Perhaps she lost someone important. That's what she told me. But me, I think she lost a baby. Adrian felt his heart stop. What makes you think that? The way she looks at me sometimes, like she wants to take me in her arms but doesn't dare. And when she brushes my hair, her hands tremble a little bit. Adrian observed his ward with a mixture of admiration and concern. This child was decidedly too perceptive. Sophia, have you been happy with Miss Whitmore? Oh, yes. Sophia's eyes lit up. She never scolds me. She lets me be sad when I want to. And she reads me stories that make me cry, but good tears. Good tears? Yes, you know, tears that come when you feel understood. Not angry tears. Adrian nodded. He understood exactly what she meant. Uncle Adrian, continued Sophia, do you think Miss Whitmore could stay forever? Would you like her to stay? More than anything in the world, Sophia replied fervently. She makes me feel like I have a real family. These words pierced Adrian's heart. Since her parents' death, Sophia had never spoken of family, had never expressed the desire to be close to someone. Then we'll do everything for her to stay, he promised. That evening Adrian couldn't sleep. He paced his study, thinking about the afternoon's conversation. Something about Margaret's reactions intrigued him deeply. Her way of looking at Sophia with an almost painful intensity, her intuitive knowledge of child psychology, and especially that sadness in her eyes that reminded him of... Adrian stopped short before the family portrait hanging above his fireplace. A portrait painted 5 years earlier, showing his sister Catherine, his brother-in-law William, and their little Sophia, aged 3. Next to them stood a young woman with chestnut hair and brown eyes, Sophia's governess at the time, Margaret Pemberton, the woman he had secretly loved for months, the woman who had mysteriously disappeared the very night his sister and brother-in-law met their death. Adrian had spent 5 years searching for her, hiring private detectives, publishing notices in newspapers, questioning all the governess agencies in London. But Margaret Pemberton seemed to have vanished from the face of the earth. And now there was Margaret Whitmore. Margaret with chestnut hair and brown eyes. Margaret who understood Sophia instinctively in a way that went beyond simple professional competence. "It can't be her," he murmured aloud. "It's impossible." But his heart was already beating faster because deep down, a wild hope was beginning to be born. What if Margaret Whitmore and Margaret Pemberton were one and the same person? What if the woman he had been searching for 5 years had just come back into his life under a different name? What if fate was finally offering them a second chance? Chapter 3. The Revelation. The next evening, Adrian had made his decision. He needed to know the truth, even if this truth risked breaking the fragile hope that was being reborn in him. He waited until Sophia was in bed to go to Margaret's apartments. He knocked gently on her door. "Miss Whitmore, could you spare me a moment?" The door opened, revealing Margaret dressed in a modest dressing gown, her hair loose falling over her shoulders. Adrian felt his heart leap. She was exactly as in his memories. "Your Grace, it's late. Perhaps it would be better." "Please," said Adrian in a voice he hoped was calm. "It's important." Margaret hesitated, then stepped aside to let him enter. Her apartments were simple but comfortable, lit by a few candles that created an intimate atmosphere. "What did you wish to discuss?" asked Margaret, visibly uncomfortable. Adrian looked at her for a long time, studying every detail of her face. "Miss Whitmore, may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course. Have you ever worked in this house before?" Margaret paled slightly. "No, Your Grace. Why this question?" "Because you remind me of someone," said Adrian, approaching her. "Someone I knew 5 years ago, someone named Margaret Pemberton." The blood completely left Margaret's face. She stepped back, her eyes widening with terror. I don't see what you're talking about," she stammered. "Margaret," said Adrian softly, deliberately using her first name. "Margaret, it's really you, isn't it?" Margaret closed her eyes, and Adrian saw her shoulders sag as if an enormous burden had just fallen upon her. "How did you recognize me?" she whispered. "Your eyes," Adrian replied, his heart beating so hard he could barely speak. "Your eyes when you look at Sophia, the way you understand her, and then tonight, seeing you with your hair loose." He approached her, extending his hand as if he feared she would disappear again. "Margaret, where were you? I spent 5 years searching for you, 5 years wondering what happened to you." Margaret opened her eyes, and Adrian saw an ocean of pain and regret in them. "I left," she said simply. "After the accident. After Catherine and William's death. I couldn't stay any more." "But why? Why leave without saying anything? Without leaving a message?" Margaret turned away, unable to meet his gaze. "Because Sophia needed a family, not a governess. And I needed distance to what? To forget that I loved you," she said in a broken voice. The silence that followed was so profound you could have heard a pin drop. Adrian looked at this woman he had searched for so long, trying to assimilate her words. "You loved me," he finally said. "How could I not love you?" Margaret turned to him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You were so good with Sophia, so patient with me. And I was just a governess. I knew nothing was possible between us." Margaret. "So when the accident happened," she continued, "I understood it was a sign, that I had to leave before doing something stupid, before telling you what I felt and ruining everything." Adrian took a step toward her. "You think loving me would have ruined everything? Isn't it obvious? You're a duke, Adrian." "I am. Nobody." "You're wrong," said Adrian firmly. "You're not nobody. You're the woman I've loved for 5 years. The woman I searched for throughout England. The woman without whom my life had no meaning." Margaret looked at him with incredulity. What are you saying?" "I'm saying I already loved you 5 years ago, that I was about to propose marriage when you disappeared, that I refused all the marriages proposed to me because no woman could replace you." "Adrian, no!" Margaret shook her head. "You can't say that. It's impossible." "Why would it be impossible?" "Because," said Margaret, sobbing, "because I'm not who you think I am. I'm not just Margaret Pemberton, the governess. I was." She stopped, visibly struggling with herself. "You were what?" Adrian encouraged. "I was Margaret Pemberton by birth," she said in a breath, "the youngest daughter of Lord Pemberton, the one who was disinherited and disowned for refusing an arranged marriage." Adrian looked at her with stupefaction. You're of nobility?" "Not anymore. When I refused to marry the Earl of Wickshire, a 60-year-old man I'd never seen, my father cast me out. I had to work as a governess to survive." "My God," murmured Adrian. All this time you were of my rank, and you thought you weren't good enough for me. I no longer had rank, no fortune, no family. I had truly become a governess, Adrian. A woman of nothing." "A woman of nothing?" Adrian approached again, gently taking her face in his hands. "Margaret, you're the most extraordinary woman I know. You had the courage to choose your own life rather than submit. You survived alone for years. You raised Sophia with a love her own mother couldn't have surpassed. Adrian. And now you've come back," he said, caressing her tears. "Without knowing it, you've come back exactly where you belonged, near Sophia, near me." "I didn't know it was your house," whispered Margaret. "When the agency told me about this position, they said it was for the Duke of Ashworth. I didn't know you had inherited the title after your brother's death. And I, who was searching for Margaret Pemberton, never thought to look for Margaret Whitmore. I took my mother's name," Margaret explained, "so I wouldn't be found, to start a new life." "But you didn't start over," said Adrian with insight. "You remained a governess. You continued caring for children. Why?" Margaret lowered her eyes. Because by caring for other children I felt like I was staying close to Sophia, keeping a link with the life I had loved. "And now?" asked Adrian. "Now that we've found each other again?" Margaret looked up at him, and Adrian saw a mixture of love and terror in her eyes. "Now I'm afraid," she admitted. "Afraid it's too beautiful to be true. Afraid of losing you again. Afraid of losing Sophia if you decide that." Adrian interrupted her by placing his lips on hers. A gentle and tender kiss that erased 5 years of separation and pain. "You'll never lose me again," he murmured against her lips. "And Sophia already loves you like a mother. She told me so herself." "Really? Really? She says you make her feel like she has a real family." Margaret began crying even harder, but this time they were tears of joy. "Marry me, Margaret," said Adrian suddenly. "Marry me, and let's become the family Sophia wants so much, the family we deserve to be from the beginning." Margaret looked at him with amazement. "Are you sure? Really sure?" "More sure than I've ever been of anything," Adrian replied. "Will you?" "Yes," whispered Margaret. "Oh, yes, Adrian, more than anything in the world." And as they kissed again, they both knew that sometimes love truly finds a way, that sometimes those destined to be together always end up finding each other again, and that sometimes consoling a broken child can lead to healing one's own heart. Chapter 4. The Family Found. The next morning, Sophia immediately noticed that something had changed. Her Uncle Adrian was smiling in a way she had never seen, and Miss Whitmore had a particular light in her eyes. "Sophia," said Adrian, kneeling before her in the breakfast parlour, "Miss Whitmore and I have something important to tell you." The little girl looked at both adults in turn, a glimmer of hope beginning in her hazel eyes. Is Miss Whitmore going to leave?" she asked in a small, worried voice. "No, darling," said Margaret. "Approaching. I'm never leaving again, actually." She looked at Adrian, who encouraged her with a smile. "Actually, if you agree, I'd like to become much more than a governess to you." "How?" asked Sophia, though part of her seemed to already guess. "Sophia," said Adrian gently, "Miss Whitmore and I love each other, and we'd like to get married. This would mean she'd become your aunt by marriage and your mamma of the heart," added Margaret, "if you wish it." Sophia looked at them in silence for a long moment, and Adrian and Margaret held their breath. Then, suddenly, the little girl's face lit up with pure happiness. "Really? Really, really?" "Really, really," confirmed Margaret, opening her arms. Sophia threw herself into them with a force that nearly knocked Margaret over, clinging to her as if she feared she would disappear. "I was right! I was right!" she cried joyfully. "You were the lost mamma looking for her little girl, and I was the little girl looking for her mamma." Adrian and Margaret exchanged a moved glance over Sophia's head. This child had been right from the beginning. They had all three been searching for each other without knowing it. "But," said Sophia suddenly, pulling back slightly to look at Margaret, "if you're my new mamma, does that mean I can call you mamma?" Margaret felt tears rise to her eyes. "If you want to, nothing could make me happier." "Mamma," said Sophia, testing the word. "Mamma Margaret. I like that. And I," said Adrian, joining them to embrace them both, "will finally have the family I've always dreamed of." 3 months later, St. George's Church resonated with joyful music for the wedding of the Duke and Duchess of Ashworth. Margaret, radiant in her ivory silk dress, held Sophia's hand, who had insisted on being maid of honor. "Today," she had declared solemnly, "we officially become a family." The ceremony was simple but moving. When the pastor asked if they took each other as husband and wife, Adrian and Margaret answered yes with a fervor that moved the entire assembly. But the most touching moment came when Sophia spontaneously stepped forward to the altar. "Excuse me, Mr. Pastor," she said with her childhood frankness, "but can you also marry Mama Margaret and me, because I want her to be officially my mama too?" The pastor, moved by this innocent request, smiled. "My dear child, the love you share with your new mama is already blessed by God. You are a family in your hearts, and that's what matters most." "So it's official?" asked Sophia. "It's official," confirmed Margaret, lifting her into her arms. "You're my daughter, and I'm your mama forever." Later, during the reception, Adrian watched his new wife and adopted daughter dancing together. Margaret had taught Sophia a simple waltz, and they were both laughing as if they had always been mother and daughter. "Your Grace," said old Henderson, approaching, "may I say how much little Lady Sophia has changed since Her Grace the Duchess's arrival?" "Indeed," Adrian agreed, "she's become the joyful child she was meant to be again." "And you too, if I may say so," added Henderson affectionately. This house hasn't known such happiness in a very long time. Adrian nodded, moved. It was true. For the first time in years, Thornfield House resonated with laughter and joy. "Papa Adrian!" Sophia ran toward him, pulling Margaret by the hand. "Mama Margaret says we can have a little brother or sister. Is it true?" Adrian blushed slightly, while Margaret burst out laughing. "Sophia, that's not exactly what I said. But you said families sometimes grow." "It's possible," said Adrian, taking his daughter in his arms. "What would you prefer, a little brother or sister?" "Both," declared Sophia without hesitation. "That way we'll be a real big happy family." Margaret and Adrian exchanged a knowing glance over Sophia's head. "We'll see," said Margaret with a mysterious smile. That evening, after putting Sophia to bed, Adrian and Margaret found themselves in their new marital bedroom. "Do you have any regrets?" asked Adrian, taking his wife in his arms. "Regrets? About what?" "About waiting so long. About spending 5 years apart." Margaret thought for a moment. "You know, I don't think so. Those 5 years made us both stronger. They taught me that true love survives everything, and they allowed Sophia to have exactly the mama she needed when she needed her." "Do you really think she needed you specifically?" "I'm sure of it," said Margaret, nestling against him. "An ordinary governess could never have understood her pain as I understood it. It needed someone who had also lost something essential, someone who knew what it was to desperately search for what they had lost. And now? Now we've all three found what we were looking for," said Margaret, smiling. "Sophia has her mama. You've found the one you loved again. And I... And you? I've discovered that love always finds a way, even after 5 years of separation, even when everything seems lost." Adrian kissed her tenderly. "I love you, Duchess of Ashworth. And I love you, my Duke, and I love our daughter." "Our daughter," Adrian repeated with wonder. "I love how that sounds." Epilogue. Love always finds a way. 2 years later, Thornfield House once again resonated with children's laughter. Sophia, now 10, had become an attentive big sister to the twins, Henry and Elizabeth, born a few months after their parents' wedding. "Mamma," she said one day to Margaret, as they walked in the garden with the babies, "do you remember when you told me stories about lost mamas?" "Yes, darling. I understood something. You weren't really telling me stories. You were talking about yourself." Margaret smiled. "Sophia was growing up and becoming more perceptive every day. You're right, I was a lost mama looking for her daughter, and you were a little girl looking for her mama. And Papa Adrian was a man looking for the love of his life. And we all found each other," declared Sophia joyfully, "like in fairy tales." "Exactly like in fairy tales," confirmed Margaret. "Mama." "Yes? When Henry and Elizabeth are older, will you tell them our story?" "Of course. What story would you like me to tell them?" Sophia thought for a moment, her little face serious. "The story of the governess who consoled a sad little girl, without knowing that the Duke of the house had been searching for that governess for years, because he loved her, and how they all found each other, and lived happily ever after." Margaret felt tears rise to her eyes. "That's a very beautiful story, darling." "It's the most beautiful story in the world," said Sophia, taking her mother's hand, "because it's our story." And as they walked back toward the house where Adrian was waiting for them, Margaret thought that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with a misunderstanding and end with a revelation. That sometimes consoling a child can lead to finding one's own lost happiness. And that love, true love, always finds a way, even after 5 years of searching, even through the tears of a little girl, even when you think all hope is lost. For the heart knows how to recognize what it seeks, even when the mind doesn't yet understand.